Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a new episode of Wind Waker Unflooded, the 3D modeling project where I am reimagining the Kingdom of Hyrule within the world and art style of The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker, corresponding the islands of the Great Sea to the mountaintops of Hyrule, fully realizing that world that we always wanted to see. We're gonna keep going. Today. Oh man, I know it. I feel like I always say this, but it's been a while since I uploaded, but it's for good reason. Is that I really wanted to wait until I had this, this little landmark done before I showed it off. And it took just a little bit of work ironing it all out and completely finishing the little region here. But I wanted to, really make sure that I had something to show off before I did this video, because I do some videos where, I make a little bit of progress and I show off a work in progress, and sometimes I get comments where it's like, well, what's the even point of the video, right? It's like, the location is so far from being done, what's the point of even watching? And I'm like, I'm just trying to keep y'all updated. But this is one where I'm like, I want to wait until it's presentable, and I think it's worth it, because today we are working on the Isle of Koridai, as seen before in the CDI Zelda game, Link the Faces of Evil, which of course is an iconic entry from the Legend of Zelda series. And I don't know, like, if there's anything that speaks to my willingness to, I don't know, like, this is a love letter to so much of the Zelda series. And obviously it's like there's a looseness that I have with what I'm willing to, bring into the canon, so to speak, right? And I think I think this definitely speaks to that, because I mean, obviously I do care about lore, and I care about trying to make it consistent and try to think about, like, okay, this is the world of Hyrule right before the Great Flood within the prologue of the Wind Waker, right? So this takes place between Ocarina of Time and Wind Waker in theory, right? But it's also like I believe that all of Hyrule, from all of the games, I believe it's all the same world, and I think there are things that may be quote unquote on screen in Breath of the Wild that may be off screen in Ocarina of Time. That doesn't mean that those features don't exist. It just means that, there's kind of an open question of like, well, okay, I believe this may still exist in the map, maybe even if it wasn't shown, right? And obviously it's like, well, that's interpretive. That's an interpretive question, but I'm willing to go that far to even say, well, let's show the Isle of Koridai, right, at this part of the timeline, like wherever you think the Faces of Evil should be in the timeline. Here is how it could exist during the era of, right before the Great Flood. And so I don't know, I'm just excited to bring it in, because this is, obviously it's like the art of Koridai is so iconic, and I don't know, like kind of bringing it into the Wind Waker's art style, using its textures and trying to also use its enemies, because one of the main creative decisions I had to make was thinking about, okay, so we have these different faces of evil, let's make those different enemies from the world of Hyrule, specifically as seen in the art style of The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker, right? And trying to pull from, okay, and trying to make it all make sense, right? It's like, okay, maybe it's not the exact same enemy, but it is something that is reminiscent of it, right? It's like, it's not a, I don't have a hard line for, well, how strict do I need to be with making sure things match up? Maybe it's not a perfect match, but it is one that matches the essence of the enemy that it replaces, right? Which to me, I don't know, to me, like, that's the most important thing, is that it captures the essence, right? Not the specifics. And I think that shows probably through a lot of my project, that I'm really interested in bringing to life a lot of other Zelda locations, but they may not be replicated with specificity, right, or exactness. What's more important about is it's interpretive. It's a new version of certain locations. And so whenever I bring something into this world, that's just something to keep in mind, that it's interpretive. And I don't know, I really have enjoyed just that process of, just like the creative freedom to kind of make this in, the way that I see fit, right? And the Isle of Koridai, right, is just something where it's like, okay, well, let me think about the geometry kind of conventions of the Wind Waker's art style, because that's definitely something that I've tried to be attentive to, is that there's a way in which it has, the way in which its terrain is presented, right? There's a stair step style to things, right? There's these hard cliffs, right? It's not just rounded edges, right? But what that allows for is, right, is really intentionally sculpted terrain that is dictated by paths and where people would walk, right? And it's like leading with that first, I think has been a really interesting way to approach terrain, right? Because it's like you don't have to go that way. You could have a really kind of natural terrain where all surfaces are kind of like rounded and bleed into each other, right? Where there's slopes. And I really like just the Wind Waker style of like, well, no, there's hard cutoffs, and obviously it's like there's game design reasons for that, there's technical limitation reasons for that, but I think there are also artistic reasons for that as well. And it's just been really interesting to try to adapt to that terrain philosophy, right? Because that's something that like you can't do with like there's a lot of ways to make terrain, right? To make meshes for terrain. Right, and I could use like, Blender has add-ons for landscape tools, and I could use the sculpt brush or use displacement modifiers to get started, but that in no way gets me closer to the terrain art style, the conventions of the Wind Waker's specific terrain, right? That's a completely different philosophy, and I really have enjoyed working with the Wind Waker's philosophy because it is just it's so intent driven, and I think that's really cool. Right. I really enjoyed that. And I've talked before, I just made a video before this one that was all about how I go about making terrain in general and my philosophies for. I think the most important things, of course, are modeling and UV mapping. And there's still like things where I'm like, I'm not, I go kind of fast and loose with the way that I especially UV map. And even modeling is something where I try to keep it low poly, and I try to suggest things with the model more than, like I don't have to, I try to figure out what I can get away with sometimes in modeling, but that is just something where it's also, that's a result of this being such a big project that, am I going to lovingly sculpt and be so precise about every inch of the map? Sometimes I'm more fast and loose, and I'm like, okay, what's the easiest way that I can kind of use primitive shapes and very quickly, and low poly, with a low poly mindset as well, quickly create what I have in my head, which I think is the right move, especially for this art style. Embracing the technical limitations, embracing the low poly, the nature of this art style, right? Embracing those limitations. So that's been really interesting, and it allows for very quick work in something where I don't have to feel held back by trying to make this super high fidelity model, right? I'm able to kind of quickly put things together with relatively simple shapes, and that's part of the beauty of the Wind Waker's art style. That's something that I definitely really enjoy. So it's just like this project for me, it's kind of only possible in this art style, and I guess like for my current level of ability, I probably could have made like an N64 map as well, or maybe even Twilight Princess's. I don't really know the way it uses. I haven't really like dug into like, are its texture philosophies, right? Its UV mapping philosophies, are those kind of, branching off from the philosophies of Wind Waker? Does it use some of the same tricks? I know there's some of them, right? I know we have these kind of stepped cliffs of Hyrule Field, and right, there's some things in common, right? And as often as you can, leaning on primitive shapes, leaning on, all right, how do we turn a simple cube essentially into what we're looking for? I know Twilight Princess has plenty of that as well. But also, I'm curious, like, maybe it may have differences just like in some of its core philosophies. I don't know. Does it use like texture fading? What was the term for that? Like when you have kind of two textures that overlay and they kind of fade between each other. Is that something Twilight Princess was able to do? Was it powerful enough? Because obviously it's like that's something you see in later games. That's something you see in Breath of the Wild, for sure. Maybe even in Skyward Sword. I don't know if that was something that was implemented really as early as Twilight Princess. I don't think you really see it in Wind Waker at all. But yeah, just something interesting to. I know that some of y'all are nerds about this kind of stuff, so I'm happy talking about this a lot. I know I usually talk about Zelda lore and stuff, but I don't know. I wanted to be attentive to. I know I have a lot of other creative people that watch these videos, and it's not just Zelda fans, but it's people that are interested in doing their own 3D modeling fan art projects, right? Or maybe it's not even fan art. Maybe you're watching and you have your own 3D projects going. Maybe you're a game designer. Maybe you're a filmmaker, right? And I don't know, I love that there's so many different people who watch my videos coming from different backgrounds, and I'm really inspired by that. So if y'all haven't heard that today, I'm figuring out what I want to do for, we're pretty close to 30K subscribers, right? Like that's a pretty big milestone. And I don't know what I want to do yet to celebrate. So comment down below your ideas. I know I put out a community post recently too that was asking for ideas, because I want to be able to make that a big event in some way. You know, I don't know, maybe I'm not gonna, you know, do anything crazy, but at least like I want to be able to release a special video. And you know, I released a Q&A video recently, but if you have any more questions, let me know, or if there's a special kind of render you want to see in the map, or you know, just let me know, because I'd love to be able to celebrate 30K subscribers when we get there, which will be sooner rather than later. I don't know, I still like don't know, like I can't even fathom how many people watch these videos, right? And to me, that's still something that is just mind-blowing, is how many people there are watching these videos and leaving comments, and that means so much to me. And I'm really thankful that so many of y'all leave comments, and you know, so many of them are positive, and I'm very thankful to have this community that is overwhelmingly very positive, right? Of course there are negative comments that I get here and there, and there are people that tell me, Joe, your voice is annoying, right? I watch these videos on mute, and I'm like, all right, like that's fine. That is your call. You don't have to watch them. You don't have to listen to them. But I do really appreciate that so many of y'all are kind, and that does mean a lot to me, and I'm thankful for that. And I try to, you know, encourage kindness on this channel, and I don't know if there's anything y'all take away from my videos. I hope that it is, you know, I hope that it's kindness. But I think more than that, I've tried to really foster, you know, a belief in your own creativity, that if you've been watching my progress and you're daunted by how big of a project this is, you know, it's something that I've kept trucking at, right? And whatever project you want to get done, I hope that, you know, by watching my project, you're inspired by, you know, some level of, you know, wanting to, like, if there's something that you want to accomplish, right? Whether that's a fan project, but really, especially for your own projects, especially for your own ambitions. If you're writing a book, if you're making a movie, if you're making a game, whatever you're doing, I hope that you're inspired to just, you know, keep putting in the work. And maybe it's a big endeavor. Writing a book is a huge deal. Making a short film or a feature-length film or an animated film with 3D animation, whatever you're doing, it's worth being able to put the time in, and I don't know, make something. I know so many of us have something to express, right? And beyond just that, find what you have to say, because it's been a joy for me to work on Wind Waker Unflooded, and to kind of figure out, well, what are the unique ways that I have something to add to the project? Because I really don't think it's worth doing if I'm not thinking about it in those terms, if I'm not thinking about how is this my version of the world, right? You know, I have to allow myself to kind of say, well, yeah, what interests me, what inspires me about the idea of this map, about seeing this world of Hyrule before the Great Flood? What do I want to see as part of the world? How do I want to rebuild Castletown and add those monuments, right? I've talked before in just about all the different new locations we've added to that, and the culture of Hyrule, right? And I want to keep adding to that throughout the world, right? That's something that really interests me, right? And just recreating, just like whether it's locations from different games and bringing those into it, right? And things that I love from the series. Also thinking about places that matter to me in the real world, and of course that's impacted the project. Ways in which I'm inspired by real places that I've visited or have attachments to for different reasons, right? Of course that impacts the project, and to me that's almost more important than it being a Zelda project, is ways in which I've brought my own perspective and experiences, right, and philosophies into the world of Hyrule, right? It's like that really matters to me, because that's what it means to be an artist. I think more than just being creative, I think being an artist is expressing something, saying something with the work that you do, right? And I don't know. I don't want to be too big idea and pretentious and snobby about these things, but just as a creator, as someone who, if y'all go to my main channel, I do short films and I compose music. You know, like that's it's more than just Wind Waker Unflooded for me, right? I do all kinds of different short films where I'm writing scripts, and so I think I can talk artistically, right? It's not just fan projects. But to me, yeah, what's really artistic is saying something, having something new to say and saying it well. I think that's the essence of what makes good art, is having something to say and saying it well. And so I don't know, I definitely want to leave y'all with that as well, and impress that upon y'all, because I think that that's important. And I think that, you know, it's okay if you're still figuring that out, figuring out what your voice is. I'm sure there's a lot of creative people that watch my channel. I want to encourage y'all that, yeah, it's like, it takes time to figure out what you have to say. And sometimes you have to start by being creative and you're still figuring out what it means to be artistic. Sometimes that's a process. That's a journey you have to go through, is to figure that out, to figure out what you have to say. You know, that definitely is a process. But it can start with being creative, and it can start with the desire to express something just through aesthetics, just to know, I think something is beautiful and I want to make something in this art style. That's a start as well. And that's something I love about Wind Waker Unflooded, is just the opportunity to just get to spend time making things in one of my favorite art styles. My favorite video game art style, period, is for sure is the art style of the Wind Waker, and just spending more time in, right, these rich colors, right? And everything I've talked about, what makes the terrain interesting and intent driven, that really inspires me as well. It's just so much about the art style of this game, right? It's absolutely beautiful. And like I said, I think it's the most beautiful art style of any video game, right? And that's an easy answer, right? Right? It's not just, I mean, this is a game I have nostalgia for, but what makes me fall in love with Wind Waker is not just the fact that I played it as a kid. Obviously, that's part of it. That makes me attached to it for certain reasons. But I think more so than that, what's so impactful about it is just that, like, every time I replay it, it's not just nostalgia. It's not just the memories of falling in love with this world for the first time as a young person. But I think it's just that I fall in love with it every time I replay it, and I go, this is still fun, and it's still something that I want modern Zelda games to look at, right? I want modern Zelda games to be able to look at how Wind Waker combines a linear story with an open world. To me, it's like, well, that's the format they should be going for. If they want to do open world Zelda games, think about how to tell a really engaging story while simultaneously having an open world. And Wind Waker does that, right? I think Twilight Princess also does that to a mostly successful degree. And obviously that world is gated in a specific way so that you really are only able to explore so much at a time. I still think it's a successful variant of that idea, and just being able to gate off parts of the world. That's not a bad thing. And that's something that definitely after Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, I've thought about, and even Echoes of Wisdom, which I think has thought about that too. The idea of how do you gate things off so that people can experience the story in a certain order, so that the story can be more impactful. And I'm very excited for the Zelda franchise to, I think, continue to iterate on that. And and my hope, of course, is that they look at something like Wind Waker and ask, yeah, how do we balance having an open world with a linear story? And I think Wind Waker is a great example, right, of how to look at that. So that's just my 2 cents. But yeah, and I don't know, like, to me, it's just, there's so many Zelda games that, like, that you can look at to this history of great design. And I think Ocarina of Time has aged, its graphics have aged, its controls have aged, and yet I think its design is still beautiful, right? Its story is still beautiful, and the way that it manages balancing gameplay and story, right? Able to string you along in a linear story. And obviously, its quote-unquote open world is a lot smaller. But I think it also still has a good philosophy at how players are able to explore very early on. Right? And they're able to see a good bit of the map very early on, right? And I think it does, and obviously I think this would be, maybe they've thought about this, but it's daunting. The idea that Ocarina of Time recontextualizes the map halfway through the game. That you have 2 versions of it, right? One set in the past and one set in the future. So it's like you have the same maps, but the NPCs are different. They say different things. There's different things happening. People have aged, right? There's different dungeons that are available. There are different items you can use. And I love that. I love that, like, well, okay, it's not just exploring more of the map, but it's exploring the same map in a new context. And that's really cool. And I don't know, I'm very excited to see whatever the next mainline 3D Zelda game is, and to see what direction they go in. That's definitely something that I think a lot about and imagine, you know, and I have opinions on, right? Like, what is right? What is the right move with all of that in mind? But I don't know. I'm just yapping, and maybe this isn't even relevant to the video anymore. But I do want to just thank you all so much for watching, and let's just take a look and show off the progress on the Island of Koridai. I'm really proud of how this turned out. It was a pretty big build, right? Because there's just all these different regions where you have to kind of get to these different faces in the island, right? The faces of evil. And so I'm proud of how it turned out. I'm really proud of how, like, I think it's a really organic looking island, right? Like, because I don't know, I plotted things out and it was like, okay, this could look kind of, just like a square of faces, right? And it's like I was really proud in this build of just how the island kind of came to life and has just a naturalistic coastline, right? And that's just something that, I don't know, it almost kind of feels like it made on its own, right? Like, I don't even feel like the architect to a certain degree. It almost feels like the model made itself. And I don't know, maybe that doesn't even make any sense, but it's just, I don't know, it was a very instinctual build, and I think it turned out well. And so I don't know, I'm not gonna yap about it anymore. I'm not gonna take up too much of y'all's time. So just like I said, thank you all so much for watching. Comment down below what y'all want to see me work on next. I love y'all's suggestions, and that really does make a difference and impacts what I work on in this project. But without further ado, I'll let you go. Now, if you're looking for other ways to support me, as always, you can support me as a creator by becoming a member on Patreon. There you'll get access to all kinds of exclusive behind-the-scenes content like in-progress outlines, scripts, storyboards, rough cuts, and even soundtracks for my newest films. By becoming a member, you'll also be thanked in the credits for any film I finish during your membership. You can also support me by streaming my music. I compose all of the scores for my own short films, and you can listen to those soundtracks on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you listen to music. Just look up Joe Kendrick. That's JoeKendrick. Y'all have a wonderful day, and without further ado, I'll let you go.